Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt in session. Today I'll be speaking with Greg Samuelson. Greg is a registered nurse and registered psychotherapist in Ontario, Canada. He has a passion for compassion-focused therapy and helped establish the Canadian network of compassion-focused therapy, which is aimed at bringing together people from across Canada and help them to learn and put into practice EFT. He's a therapist, supervisor, trainer, practitioner and teacher of Zen Meditation, and has trained and taught in martial arts for over 20 years. I'm very keen to have a chat with my friend Greg Samuelson. Well, welcome,
Thank you.
Greg Samuelson. Thank you very much for coming on and having a chat on Compassion in a T-shirt in session. I'm very excited to speak with you. It's 7 a.m. here in Brisbane, and I think 4 p.m. yesterday in Ontario, Canada. So actually, how is the weather over there?
It's a little cool. It's about minus 13, sunny and nice though. Really nice winter's day.
Minus 13 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
We were just checking before, and I think here it's 34 degrees Celsius. So hot and humid. Other sides of the world, which is interesting. I think we mainly first met face to face at the Compassion Summit in Sparkle, New York, that was arranged by Dennis. But we'd kind of, I think, interacted, by the wonderful social media thing prior to that. Is that when we?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I knew of you on Facebook, and certainly your wonderful podcast with James Kirby introduced me to both of you, and had lots of fun listening to the two of you talk about compassion. And I often direct people to the podcast to listen to guided exercises.
Yes. The Compassion Initiative podcast. Yeah, James and I were a little bit slack on that last year, unfortunately. We're going to try this year, but it hasn't started overly well. But yeah, I remember because you gave me this wonderful cup. There we go. The Canadian Network Compassion Focused Therapy. And I'll be keen to talk a little bit about your initiative there as we go along. But I wondered whether you could actually just start with talking a little bit about yourself, perhaps your work, but your life, I suppose, if you can. It's always interesting to hear where people have come from. So yeah, what's the Greg Samuelson story?
Absolutely, thank you. I do think that how I grew up probably obviously influenced a lot how I am today and the direction I took, and compassion-focused therapy being interesting to me. When I was young, we moved around a lot, and my father was a musician. So one thing that people might be surprised here is one of the founding members of the Canadian Network for Compassion-Focused Therapy. I was born in the United States, born in California. We moved to Toronto by the time I was about 12 years old. But before that, we had lived in about 10 or 11 different places. So my father's a musician. Wherever you get a better job offer for something, you move to that place. So it was interesting. I became a person who could easily sort of, I think, mix with and get along with different types of people because of that, moving a lot in different situations. And when I was younger, I never would have been able to tell you what I wanted to do when I grew up, really. But one thing that when I reflect back that I think was always consistent is that I always said I wanted to do something where I helped other people.
Right.
And so it really has sort of come around to that. And then I went to school for nursing, graduated in 1989. Before that, I had worked in a group home with physically disabled adults, and helping them with day-to-day needs and activities. Went back to school for nursing. When I went to school for nursing, I had no idea that I'd work in the area of mental health, but then found that to be most interesting when I was at school.
Hmm.
Worked as a nurse, a mental health nurse in different areas of inpatient and outpatient mental health,
Uh-huh.
crisis services and hospital emergency rooms over the years. And then more and more over the years, got into actually having training in and doing psychotherapy
Right.
with clients using different models.
Mm.
And then it's probably only about 5 years ago or so that I became
Mm.
introduced to compassion focused therapy.
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
doing a 1 year certificate program in mindfulness and psychotherapy through the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy in the States, which is a wonderful program, by the way.
Hmm. Hmm.
But Dennis Church was one of the presenters to that program.
Of course, yeah.
And so we watched recorded lectures by Dennis, and then he presented. And I really liked the model, and I really liked the way that Dennis expressed the model.
Hmm.
One thing I also liked that Dennis talked about is he wasn't asking us to leave behind any of the skills that we knew from other models. He
Hmm.
was saying you can use everything you know and bring it into the framework
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
compassion focused therapy, which I really liked.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after that, I wound up doing some training that Dennis Church and Laura Silverstein Church do on Praxis
Hmm.
in the US. And then I joined a advanced consultation group that Dennis was running.
Hmm. Mm.
Yeah, so that's how I sort of fell into doing this.
Mm.
I had an interest in mindfulness and meditation because I've also been doing Zen meditation for the past bit more than 15 years or so.
Right, right. Actually, a lot of that resonates for me. I can sort of relate to that early felt sense of wanting to be helpful, to others. Even as a sort of a teenager, for me it was, reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl,
Mm,
and having chats with a few key people in my life. But just that sense of being helpful, and in a funny way, for you, and I feel like it's similar to me. It kind of made a full circle to compassion and compassion focused therapy, where that early helping, caring, motivation sort of almost finally gets a name or something.
yeah, it makes sense. And I do think that CFT has helped me find a way to organize the work I do with people in that way. Like I do
Mm,
think those two worlds of meditation, trying to understand ourselves and others through meditation, but then having a framework that, to me, CFT is a therapeutic model that is just very straightforward and very practical. It
mhm,
doesn't
mhm,
ask me to intellectualize too much. It asks me to be curious about things,
mhm.
and think about things that I'm feeling and that I'm noticing other people are feeling and that we're feeling together.
Yeah.
But it doesn't demand a really complex overlay of, all sorts of hoops to jump through. And that
Mm,
really, really appealed to me.
mm. And very experiential, isn't it? In that sense, it's got a number of set pieces, as they say, that really help people feel it, I suppose, and experience it. In the session, and there can be some of that psychoeducation stuff, which can get people thinking a little bit as well. But then there's these follow up set pieces that I think is really useful. And I agree too with the other or another point you made, which is that actually, CFT kind of plays very nicely with other approaches, or even integrates in, and we can do the things that we might have done before, but just in a compassion focused way as well. And I find that a very helpful aspect to it. Having said that, I do find myself more and more, um, you know, just doing CFT in a way, I find.
Yeah, I think I do as well. I think I used to be doing like maybe some CBT and bringing in compassion, or in the clinic I work at full time for a large mental health hospital. We do DBT informed therapy and interpersonal psychotherapy for depression and so on. But in my private practice, it tends to be more just CFT
Hmm.
um, is enough. And then once in a while, I'll bring in one of those ideas from one of
Mm,
those other therapies as it fits for the client and is helpful for them.
mm,
Um,
mm,
yeah, but CFT explains enough for me. And I do think the benefit of the experiential practices and feeling things in session with a therapist and practicing responding to it differently or attending to it differently is really, really powerful for clients.
mm, mm. So just sort of dive in a little bit more to that bit, if you can. Just the clinical application there for you. What sorts of how do you use CFT clinically, or your work as a therapist and so on?
Well, I use CFT with almost every client I work with now. So I have a few different practice settings. So my full-time job is at a satellite clinic of a large mental health hospital,
Hmm.
an hour away from the mental health hospital. I always joke with people that the best way to work for a large organization is an hour away from the large organization, where you can get the support when you need it, but you're working fairly independently.
Yes.
There we do have some prescribed models that we're supposed to use with different
Right.
populations. Um, but then I also do work for a clinic in Toronto called the Mindfulness Clinic,
Hmm.
which is a clinic Dr. Paul Kelly founded that employs about 30 psychotherapists.
Mm.
Right now, all working virtually, but usually seeing clients
Hmm.
in person in downtown Toronto, and
Mm.
my own private practice, GPS Psychotherapy.
Mm.
Um, I have the benefit because of my experience and the clinic I work in my full-time job. I've worked with people experiencing almost any type of difficulty.
Right.
So people experiencing anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder,
Mm.
um, people with different types of psychotic disorders.
Hmm.
And I have found that, so it's given me the opportunity to try using CFT with
Mm.
all of them.
Mm.
And I really have found that it's helpful to everybody.
Hmm. Mm. Yes, it's that notion of really, human suffering, and the way that compassion,
Mm,
is kind of applied just everywhere, and I do feel too that a lot of those core principles are widely applicable. Do you
mhm,
notice? Do you notice any particular? Because one of the areas I'm sort of quite interested in is the the challenges that we might have with our clients, or that they might have with the approach. And of course, fears, blocks, and resistances are an important part of that. And I've been sort of putting my mind to this a little bit lately, because in some ways, while it's very prominent, the idea of working with fears, blocks, and resistances in CFT, the tin tacks of how to do it, is sort of
mm.
can sometimes feel a bit elusive. I mean, there are some key bits to that as well, I guess. But I was just really interested, especially across what sounds like a very diverse population. What do you find with some of those challenges, or how do you work with them?
I think the interesting thing is, like you're saying, the universality of human suffering. And there
Mm,
is also a certain commonality or universality of some of the fears, blocks, and resistances, right?
yeah,
So a lot of the fears, blocks, and resistances I encounter in clients are the same ones I have, right?
right.
Fears of, oh, am I not good enough?
Yeah.
Oh, Dr. Stan Steindel's asked me to talk to him about CFT. What do I know about CFT? What do I have to share? What are people going to think of what I have to say? So am I good enough? Am I going to be
Yes.
respected? What if people don't really care about me? So, I mean, clients express these same things. And I do think,
Mm,
well, as Paul Gilbert, the founder, would say, we all have sort of these archetypal images, but also archetypal fears
mm,
often. And then, of course, people have specific fears, blocks, and resistances based on their previous experiences in life, what they've
mm,
gone through, what life has taught them about
mm,
other people and whether other people are safe or unsafe.
mm.
People are craving connection and closeness, but if if closeness has a scary aspect for it to them. I
Yes.
do think it's different with different clients, and maybe it depends sort of on the client's orientation. With some clients, I tend to look at and talk to them about fears, blocks, and resistances in more of a cognitive way, helping them understand them and sort of restructure them. With
Yes.
some people, it is doing the experiential exercises like some imagery or chair work and getting to talking to the part that has that fear, and then learning to extend some compassion to that part. So I always
Mm,
talk to people about that. What we're trying to do in CFT, or in fact, I think in most models, is we're just by doing these exercises, sort of externalizing the psychological process that we'd like to see going on when somebody's coping well with something.
mm, mm,
So if they can have that compassionate part of themselves come up be helpful to that part of themselves that has the anxiety, the fear, the sadness. And I
Mm.
think that can be very powerful.
Mm.
And it sounds so simple, but it is in the practice that it becomes really, really powerful.
Yeah, actually, the point I think in amongst there, what you're making really is that actually fears, blocks, and resistances are themselves just another expression of, sort of the human mind, and things like threat system, or other aspects that we're kind of working with anyway in a whole range of ways. And so in a sense we're just approaching those inhibitors in, similarly. We might
Hmm.
use psychoeducation, or kind of explain a little bit about what they are and how they work. We might use some cognitive work and explore thoughts, and sort of perhaps even respond to some of that. We might do imagery work or other experiential work as well, that helps to sort of create an experience of something different. But it's actually, that is the work, really, isn't it? In a way, in CFT, is working through those fears, blocks, and resistances, and then compassion sort of really just bubbles up.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think you expressed that really nicely. And I also think that it's the idea expressing to people, it's related to and goes with it's not your fault, given that we have these tricky brains, we don't choose our early childhood experiences and so on. But I do also think it's this idea that like the acknowledging and validating someone's experience. That like,
Mm,
well, of course it makes sense that you're feeling that way. It
mm,
makes sense that given um, the evolutionary functions of different emotions and how they're
yep,
supposed to motivate us,
yep,
that of course you feel anxious and nervous in that situation. Of
yep,
course you feel sad in that situation. And it makes perfect sense that you don't want to have that sad part. So it's sort of off to the side, not integrated. But
yeah.
why don't we see if we can get a little closer and understand it?
Mm. Yeah, it makes sense. It's valid. Me too, even, like,
Yeah, absolutely.
it's that common humanity aspect to all of that. Empathy, our ability to then sort of empathize with and mentalize perhaps a little bit with what that other person is going through, and then also sympathize too. Like, actually, I was thinking this morning, my goodness, I have to speak to Greg Samuelson. Like, what if I seem stupid to him and ask dumb questions? So, you know, our
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of our two little not good enough brains on either side of the world.
Yeah, it is true. In so many ways, we're all just going through the same things internally, aren't we?
Mm, yeah, and actually, I remember, for me, early, the main fear block and resistance type thing that emerged was just feeling undeserving, in that sense of
Mm,
compassion, and even my own compassion. I was at it was actually mindful self-compassion retreat with Kristen Neff and Chris Germer,
mm.
and I remember expressing this concern, and Chris said something like, "Oh well, you'll always feel undeserving." And I was like,
We're
but
like, thank you
he
very
said,
much.
yeah, but he said what'll change is how you relate to yourself when you feel undeserving, and that was like, sort of a bit of a light bulb moment, really, that like, how do we, and that's sort of what you're saying, too, is how do we sort of relate to these parts of ourselves that are absolutely legitimate, make perfect sense, completely valid, and we can sort of manage those.
Yeah. And then if you relate to that part differently, then of course, and if you accept that part, that it makes sense that that part's there and it's okay that it's there, like say an anxious part, um, then the distress related to that tends to come down, which is
Hmm.
really nice to see.
Mm.
Yeah, I will tell you one thing that was helpful to me when you're
Yeah.
talking about your experience with Chris Germer is 2 years ago when you and Marcella did that part of the workshop on understanding and relating to shame memories,
Yes. Yeah.
because that really did help me in understanding why I sometimes feel undeserving. When
Yeah.
I thought back to some of the shame memories that I hadn't necessarily identified as shame memories,
Mm.
where I just had thought of them as being like, oh, that wasn't a pleasant thing that happened.
Yeah.
But I wasn't
Mm.
I wasn't labeling it or thinking of it as shame. But when I look back, I was like, oh yeah, that experience probably did make me feel
Mm.
a little bit less than, a little
Mm,
bit
mm,
unwanted. And so it
mm.
makes sense then why that stays with me.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we often research the things that are somewhat relevant to us, don't we? And so that's been the thing for me. Yeah, I've found it really invaluable exploring that idea of. I mean, really, Marcella, sort of has come up with that in a sense, along with Paul and her other supervisor, Jose Pinto Gavea. But they, this idea of shame memories and that they have traumatic qualities and that they can become central to how we see ourselves, and that I feel is a very helpful thing for me too, to just sort of notice that and see how we are shaped by experiences, and it kind of sort of lingers a little bit. Shame and feeling undeserving, I think, is a big thing for me
Yeah,
as
it makes
well.
sense that it does. And it keeps us so stuck in
Yeah.
moving forward in some ways and helping clients understand that it keeps us stuck. And the difference between shame and guilt, that
Mm.
shame has to do with seeing ourselves as not good enough or something wrong with ourselves. And again, it does seem to me, though, in the model and just practically speaking, it comes back to identifying those parts and extending them some compassion.
Yeah.
Just really, it,
Mm.
it sounds too easy, but it really is that straightforward.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, actually, that's my next question. Really was what have you found in terms of kind of successes or triumphs or sort of, especially maybe in clinical work, but elsewhere as well, where CFT has really helped, or that you've witnessed change in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing is just with clients in general, I see CFT being helpful to, I think everybody I've worked with using CFT.
Mm,
So it's always really nice as far as helping people with anxiety feel a little bit less anxious, be less distressed by their anxiety, helping people make sense of their experience,
mm,
helping people learn ways that they can create or enhance their own internal resources to
mhm,
feel safe base and a secure attachment within themselves when they're having difficult times,
mm.
while at the same time connecting with others who are helpful to them, but not just depending on others. I think
Mhm.
it's really, really nice and helpful. I do think in our society, in North America and in Canada, we tend to be sort of very independent and self-reliant.
Mm.
So then, sometimes allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with other people. And I think the model can help people to
Mhm.
feel encouraged to connect with others in that way. So
Mm.
clinically, it's been great. Um,
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
far as helping other clinicians
Oh, yeah.
understand compassion, I've really enjoyed that as well. The idea of helping with the Canadian network.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think I mentioned to you earlier that Leanne Rondeau had an idea. She had put an email actually on the Compassionate Mind email list at one point saying, are there any other Canadian clinicians out
Right.
there who would be interested in connecting? And I sent her an email saying, yes, and why don't we find more?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
we just started putting out some emails and had, I guess, about 3 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more than that, had a video conference meeting of some interested therapists online. And then we started an online peer support group for
Mhm.
people who are
Mhm.
interested in learning about and using CFT in their practice. Some people already were, and some people were more wanting to develop their skills. And then that translated to a little bit of a growth, which has really been gratifying to see.
Mm.
So
Mm.
currently, well, we have a Facebook group and a Facebook page. We really are just a very loose network of professionals using the model. There's no really defined structure.
Right.
But we have the Facebook group and page. Um, Dr. Kimberly Sagi in Ottawa has right now an online CFT peer support group that meets regularly. We were having regular meetings in Toronto in person that have been since the pandemic started
Mm.
on Zoom, which has been wonderful as well because we've had our colleagues from South America join us, some from the United States.
Mm.
Ellie from who leads the CFT peer group in Greece was in our
Yes.
last Toronto meeting, so it's
Yes.
lovely to see her.
Yes. She will be
Uh,
on the Compassion in a T-shirt in session. I've got her
nice.
lined up.
Nice. Yeah, we've also had some wonderful people come forward and offer to give webinars, and very free with their time. So Dr. Allison Kelly, who's in
Hmm.
University of Waterloo in Ontario, who does research into CFT and eating disorders.
Yep.
She did a webinar for us. Dr. Darcy Harris, who's a professor of thanatology
Yes.
at Western University in Ontario. Um, and those can actually be found on our YouTube channel if you're interested in looking at
Aha.
them.
Aha.
Yeah.
Actually, what I
So,
will do is I'll put all of these links in the description below on the YouTube page, my YouTube page, and people can link in with yours and also some of those other sort of resources there. I mean, yes, it sounds like you have actually, spawned, if that's the right word, a very vibrant CFT community right around Canada, which is a huge place too.
yeah, so we've got a few members. We've got Colleen Allison in British Columbia on the West Coast, who her interest, she's done a ton of training with Russell Colton, with Paul Gilbert. Her interest is in CFT for trauma and PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some members on the East Coast. We're always welcome and trying to fill in any gaps in the country because, of course, we have many different time zones. So
Yes.
people supporting people locally would be a wonderful thing. Um, the opportunity to have some workshops as well. So Tobin Bell did
Yes.
a therapeutic chair work workshop for us in the summer 2 years ago, just after you saw him in New York. He came
Oh,
up to
that's right.
Toronto and then toured around Canada a little bit. And then he and Matt Pugh just recently did a online workshop for people in Canada on therapeutic chair work and online adaptations,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
was quite nice. And we have this wonderful fellow, Paul Gilbert, right now doing 12 weeks of training with us on using compassion focused therapy in groups.
Ah. Hmm. Is that a sort of how much is each session? How long is each session?
Just an hour for each session.
An hour for 12.
So there were some Canadian clinicians who do group programs in the community and also in hospital outpatient programs,
Mm.
who had talked about wanting to use the model in groups, but
Yeah.
wanting to have the foundation of some training
Mm.
in using the model in groups.
Mm.
And so after doing some exploring and trying to figure out who could do that for us, Paul was kind enough to offer to train us on using CFT in groups, which is
Mm-hmm.
really nice and really generous of him. We really
Mm.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so that's wonderful. I always enjoy hearing Paul talk about the model. It is a lot of information coming through you through the pipeline of his brain very quickly. And I always find I sit with it and I understand it more and more as I sit with it, which is wonderful.
It's terribly stimulating to listen to Paul speak, isn't it? Whether it
Yeah.
be him doing a presentation or sort of over a cup of coffee or dinner or something. Like he's very very interesting and has such a sharp mind. I was lucky enough to do that CFT in groups face to face when he was here in Australia last, just before the pandemic. So
Nice.
it's a really great kind of adaptation of the approach. I think
Hmm.
very useful.
Yeah, I think it will be very useful for a lot of folks who are working and doing work using CFT. The
Mm.
latest thing I've moved into is doing a little bit of supervision of people
Mm-hmm.
who are interested in using CFT. So started a couple of small online supervision groups,
Mm-hmm.
and so really enjoying helping other people become more familiar with the model and thinking about how they would use the model with the clients that they're working with.
Mm. Mm. I mean, the thing about you, Greg, that I've really known from the start is just your sort of enthusiastic and energetic, and passionate wish to spread the news and to connect with people and to really, kind of have people aware and involved, in this whole
Mm.
CFT thing. You've become, along with your colleagues and so on. I know you're also very humble about it, but that you've become, really a driving force there, I think, in Canada and around the world, really, as a sort of proponent in this stuff. So really have always appreciated that, and also just your supportive me and James and so on, in some of those earlier years and more recently. So, yeah, thank you for all of that really great work.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. That really is quite kind of you. It's I mean, it is interesting because the way that our tricky brains work,
Mm.
um, I don't really things that I already know. I've realized I don't really value that I know what I already know, if that makes
Uh-huh.
sense.
Yeah.
And I think I've heard that explained that our evolved brain sort of wants us not to overvalue our past achievements, so we can sort of like, well, we're going to keep moving forward
Right. Yeah.
with things. But I mean, I do. It is interesting when we reflect on why we do these things, and we reflect on our motivations for things, because I'd be disingenuous if I said, oh, well, I didn't do it a little bit because I want people to like me and think I know what I'm saying and so on. But really, my main motivation is still like when I was a kid, when I realized
Yeah.
to be helpful to other people. And if I can be helpful to the clients I work with individually, because that's really where my passion is using this model in individual psychotherapy with clients.
Mm.
Um, but then if I can help other people who are interested in the model understand it and then transfer that to them being helpful to other people or enhancing their already wonderful skills of being helpful with other people, then I do feel like I've done something of value, that
Mm.
really there is something positive that I've done, that there's a ripple effect that makes a difference.
Mm. I think it's a nice combo of, you could say, drive and soothing, in a way. It is a bit of drive, and I feel that too, wanting to sort of having aspirations and feeling sort of good about achievements and seeking approval. The undeserving self constantly wanting a little bit of that, but really too it is the soothing system, bringing people together and that sense of affiliation and feeling safe and content and happy and curious and exploring and open together is a big part of it.
Absolutely. I think that's probably why doing this networking in Canada has been very important to me. I do realize that the sense of community is very, very
Mm.
important to me. And there are a few different areas of my life. So I think I mentioned to you in a previous email. So I do some martial arts
Mm.
and I love doing the martial arts and I find them very interesting and stimulating. But it is a sense of community with the people
Hmm.
that I do it with that is really the most important thing. And our martial art, our teacher actually talks about it as being a family.
Hmm.
Um,
Mm.
and then the Zen practice that I go to with my teacher at his Zen temple as well. It is the community of people, the Sangha of people that practice together.
Mm.
That's what's most important to me, because I'm practicing along with these people. I'm not just doing my practice in the midst of other people.
Mm. Mm. And it really highlights, doesn't it, that sort of sometimes that piece is really missing for people. That piece of social connection and a sense of safeness or warmth or let alone things like having a sense of security with others or the safe haven type stuff you mentioned briefly before. That's the thing, isn't it? Is that it's missing and sometimes has always been missing. And so compassion focused therapy really tries to work in that space.
Yeah, I do think it's so important. I mean, so many of the people I work with doing individual therapy have, yeah, felt the lack of that. And often I
Mm.
think the work in therapy is about also talking to people about, yeah, where do they feel a lack? Where do they feel something's missing? What would
Mm.
they like to cultivate more of?
Mm.
Um, and I mean, I do think that in some ways our online presences have only confounded those problems for a lot of people. I work with a
Mm.
lot of younger adults who many of their friendships and even romantic relationships are solely online,
Mm.
and they've never met these people in person. One person I'm working with right now, she's identified, I worked with her a few years back when she was a bit younger, and she's
Mm.
still quite young compared to me. Uh, but she's had a realization back then, she didn't think that in-person relationships were important to her. And now she's realized, well, yeah, I think it feels a bit different to
Mm.
be with a person. And so we were
Mm.
talking about that the other day. And
Mm.
then, of course, this pandemic, this global pandemic that
Mm.
has actually in some ways mandated that we not not see the people we're already well connected with
Mm,
has made things even more difficult for folks.
mm. Yes, I feel, deep gratitude for how, and sort of lucky in terms of how things have panned out here in Australia. We did have a significant period of lockdown last year, but since then we've been very lucky with the pandemic, and so still able to be out and about and sort of seeing people with various, social distancing and sanitizing and contact tracing and all that sort of stuff, but still able to
Mhm.
see people. And I know that in other places of the world, it just has been a massive hit on that whole social safeness, social connection.
Yeah, unfortunately here, things haven't been terrible. They haven't been as bad as just to the south of us, but
Mm,
they haven't been great. I think that you guys did a better job of locking down harder and longer in the beginning that helped you
mm,
get out of this. Um, Unfortunately, we are in a lockdown right now that will probably be ending soon. But back in the spring, we had a lockdown where when I'd go out for a little jog, the streets were empty and
yeah.
you could really tell you're in a lockdown.
Mm,
Now, it doesn't seem like the traffic's reduced. People are still out, and you see people standing on street corners, walking their dogs, just fairly close together, talking with each other. And I've been talking to clients about the idea of exposure with response prevention, and how habituation to
mm,
something that makes scared. And really, I think part of the difficulty here is the dissonance between people maybe intellectually knowing they should be scared or cautious, but that this has been going on for so long that they're not staying away from it. That it's
mm,
just become part of life, but not part of a life in that they're being cautious about it. Part of life in
mm,
that they've dropped off the caution.
mm. There's that habituation in a way, like you say,
Yeah,
has kind of kicked in. I mean, do you notice personally how CFT or compassion stuff kind of gets into you? I mean, how have things changed personally because of your involvement there?
I think I am more comfortable with letting myself feel some of the feelings that I don't like to feel.
Mm,
For me, that's really sadness. Anxiety, I think I've always known a little bit what to do with, how to
mm,
soothe myself, calm myself, ground myself a little bit. But sadness, I think when I was a little bit younger, was something that I would push off to the side and not want to look
mm,
at.
mm,
But now understanding that sadness is okay, that it has a place.
mm,
And I tell clients I will now talk to myself. Uh,
mm,
I will have a little conversation, either driving in the car, talking out loud to myself, or in my head, where I will actually just say things like, it's okay. Of course you feel that way. It's a hard situation, but I care about you. We're going to get through this together. We've gone through it before. And just saying little things like that to myself just help me feel better.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think for me, it's anger.
Mm,
It's sort of a curious thing to sort of ponder. I haven't really thought about that before, but I'm sadness and anxiety for me are probably things that I've, kind of worked around a little bit. But ever since I was a little kid, anger was the thing that I sort of struggled the most with, both
mm,
anger and its relationship with shame. I'd say is kind
mm.
of the tricky one for me. But
Yeah, it's interesting. I find for a lot of the people that I work with, it can be the early messages we get about anger and whether it's okay to
yeah,
show anger, to express anger. I know my anger probably doesn't, I don't probably never come out with like really obvious anger, but my anger probably comes out more as just like sarcastic criticism of others.
okay,
Uh,
a
and
caustic tongue.
Yeah, so it's a little more subtle, but it's definitely there. And yeah, it does that shame piece where either shame or guilt, depending on how I'm
Mm,
feeling about it, but
yeah.
definitely that feeling bad about it afterwards, because
Yes.
it's not my compassionate motivation is not always awake when that
Hmm.
happens.
Yes.
And I do talk to clients and other therapists now about, of course, you can be angry and still operate from your compassionate motivation. You can be sad or anxious and still operate from a
Mm,
compassionate motivation. So it doesn't mean at all having to get rid of those emotions.
mm,
This means, how do I, given that I'm really angry at this person and I feel like the anger is justified in this situation, how can I be as helpful as possible to myself
mm,
and not be too harmful to the other person in the process? Because I do want
mm.
to maintain a relationship with that person. But how
Yeah.
do I stand up for myself? Because again, there's a reason you feel angry, and anger is there to motivate you in a positive way to stand up for yourself.
Mm, mm. Yeah, Paul Gilbert has in his group work the compassionate assertiveness, doesn't he? And the role of that, and this notion that aggression, anger, and aggression might arise out of the threat system, but assertiveness actually is not just between submission and aggression,
Mm,
but rather, with both of which are kind of like fight flight in a sense, the
yeah,
threat system. But assertiveness actually arises out of the soothing system, that sense of connection and wanting to stay connected, and wanting to have that kind of win-win experience. It's not just middle. It's not just in the middle. It's actually moving to that compassionate motivation. And I love how you said that. That just sort of noticing, oh, okay, my compassionate motivation, isn't awake. I think you said,
mm,
and I think that's really nice, just to sort of rouse it again, and up it.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It's like maybe they're the coals or the embers there, but maybe they need we have to take the bellows of our intention and wake them up a little bit.
Yes, the bellows of our intention. Yeah, okay, that's great. So one of the things that I'm sort of asking uh, of you, and of the guests on Compassion in a T-shirt in session, is for 3 tips. So for people watching, one of the ideas of this particular YouTube channel is kind of to be helpful for people who are on something of a compassionate journey. They're sort of learning about it, discovering it, cultivating it in themselves, and it's tricky and interesting and kind of inspiring, but also there's vulnerability there, as you alluded to. So yeah, I just thought I'd ask you too, what might be 3 tips that you would offer for people on their compassionate journey?
Mm. Well, I think the first thing is just learn about the model, like learn some of the basics of the model. If you want to
Mm,
use CFT in helping yourself or helping others,
mm.
there are some wonderful books out there. By the way, congratulations on your recent publication. I can't wait to get a copy.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
But I'd certainly recommend getting that book. Um, and then other wonderful books, like I often recommend to people, Russell Colt's CFT Made Simple as a starting place.
Mm,
Certainly the compassion focused therapy from the inside out for self-practice,
mhm,
self-reflection,
mm,
but also find people you can learn with. So I guess
mm,
the second tip is like find a little bit of a community. Find
mm,
people that you can learn alongside with, that you can talk about, your successes and your struggles in using the model, how you're understanding the model. It's always good to be in community with people who can say, really, you're understanding it that way? You're
mm,
trying to apply it that way? Well, I do it this way. And
mm,
they can help correct our misunderstandings, or maybe we help them in that way as well.
mm,
And I think the other tip is if you want to use CFT as a therapist, just once you have some learning and a little bit of knowledge under your belt, jump in. I think
mhm,
sometimes we're a little scared, hesitant, and feel a little too vulnerable when we've just learned something new. And we're worried about, can I be effective in using this? Am I going to be helpful to this client? Am I somehow going to be harmful because I'm using something that I haven't used before? But that hasn't been my experience. I think the clients are pretty open to things when we come with our genuine motivation to be
mm,
helpful to them in session. And then your understanding and your skill will grow over time.
mm. Oh, those are really, really wonderful. Yeah, learning about the model, finding people to then learn and practice with, and then kind of jumping in and getting started with it. And I I think from a CFT and a therapist point of view, that's very true. But also from a compassion in daily life point of view as well. Just sort of jumping in and giving it a go, and sort of it's a little bit, give it a try, reflect, learn, put it back
Yeah.
into practice again, and especially with certain parts of the CFT approach. There are some bits that feel easier to engage with, like some of the psychoeducation or the 3 circles model. But even some of that talking to myself stuff that you mentioned before, the multiple selves work, the chair work, just jumping in and trying it, I think is great.
Yeah, because it can feel a little unfamiliar and a little strange because the unfamiliarity of somebody hasn't done a lot of imagery work with people before,
Yeah.
or chair work. And I mean, so often I'll phrase it that way with clients. I'll say, I'll have explained that there are these things we do, but then when it comes to chair work, I'll just say to them, "Oh, you think, what about trying this? What are you ready to just give it a go? Let's see what happens." And usually they're pretty willing.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's
I think
wonderful.
I think I was a little fortunate in the guiding the imagery exercises and so on, that I had the background in meditation and also teaching
Yeah.
meditation as part of
Yes.
that world. So I felt a little familiar and comfortable with guiding people through something that feels like a meditation exercise.
Yeah. Well, that's really wonderful, Greg. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you. Of course, your point there about social connection and people to learn with and so on. I've definitely missed everyone, not being able to see anyone for over a year now in the broader international CFT community. So of course, that's my sneaky little sort of motive here, is to be able to talk to you guys and to speak with you again face to face.
Yeah, it's really nice to connect with you. This last fall was going to be the year that I was going to make it to the Compassionate Mind conference in the UK. And then, you know what they say about your plans, right?
Yep.
If you
Best
want to
later
make
than
God
never.
laugh, tell him your plans.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I will really look forward to seeing you again, either in New York or in England.
Yep.
Um,
It'll
it'll
happen.
be so nice to get together again in person and just see everybody and share stories and connect.
It really is a wonderful family. So if people were wanting to be in touch or engage with your work, and you mentioned a number of things earlier as well, but yeah, what would be the best way for people to do that?
The best way to get in touch with me directly is just to email me at either gpspsychotherapy@gmail.com or cftcan, so cftcan@gmail.com.
Okay, great.
I'll give you the links for the Facebook that you can put up. If there are Canadian therapists who watch this and are interested in connecting, I am always interested in helping people connect with each other.
Yes.
So yeah, please get in touch. Don't hesitate.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, yes, I'll definitely include all of that in the description below, as they say. All right, Greg. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for putting this time aside on your Sunday afternoon. And we will see you again soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Stan. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Good. Thanks, mate.